On a blistering August day in 216 BCE, the fields near Cannae became a hellscape of steel and screams. The ground trembled beneath the marching feet of tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, armored and armored, their banners held high, their hearts filled with the certainty of victory. The mighty Roman legions, proud and numerous, advanced to crush what they believed to be a smaller, weaker enemy, the Carthaginian forces under the command of Hannibal. But the sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air heavy with dust and the iron scent of blood. What began as a confident march into battle quickly twisted into a nightmare beyond any Roman's worst fears. Thousands were cut down in brutal, close-quarter slaughter, trapped like rats in a cage with no escape. The clash of swords echoed endlessly, punctuated by desperate cries and the thunderous pounding of hooves. This was no ordinary defeat. On this single day, Hannibal executed what many historians consider the deadliest military trap ever set. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers perished, their legions swallowed whole by a brilliant, ruthless plan. How did one general, outnumbered and outgunned, orchestrate such a devastating victory against the might of Rome? What dark genius lay behind the trap that left Rome reeling and the ancient world forever changed? The secret lay in a maneuver so cunning and precise that it still mesmerizes military minds more than 1,000 years later. Hannibal's double envelopment, a tactic that surrounded and crushed his enemy from every side, leaving no quarter, no hope of escape. A perfect storm of deception, timing, and brutal efficiency. But this battle was just one chapter in a much larger saga. The Second Punic War, a fierce clash between two titanic powers, Rome and Carthage, a war that shaped the destiny of the Mediterranean world. It was a war of relentless strategy, of pain, and of courage tested in fire. Today, we delve deep into that day of slaughter, that masterclass in warfare and suffering. We explore how Hannibal's tactical brilliance forced Rome to its knees, and why this bloody victory was both a triumph and a tragedy. Prepare to witness the deadliest military trap ever set, and to understand why it worked. Chapter 1. The spark that ignited an empire's fury. Long before the fields of Cannae ran red, two great powers stood on a collision course for domination of the Western Mediterranean. Rome, a rising republic hungry for expansion, and Carthage, a wealthy city-state built on trade and naval mastery. Both saw the same prize: control over crucial sea routes and rich lands. The air between them crackled with tension, a geopolitical tinderbox ready to explode. At the heart of this escalating conflict was the city of Saguntum, a prosperous Iberian settlement allied with Rome, but located deep in Carthaginian territory. Hannibal, the fiery Carthaginian general, saw Saguntum as a threat, a Roman foothold on his doorstep that could not be tolerated. When Hannibal laid siege to the city, it was more than a military action. It was a direct challenge to Rome's authority. The siege was brutal and relentless. Saguntum's walls were battered day and night, and its defenders fought desperately. When the city finally fell, it wasn't just a loss of territory. It was a personal affront to Rome, a bold declaration of war. Rome's Senate could not ignore this insult. The destruction of Saguntum lit the fuse for the Second Punic War, a conflict destined to reshape the ancient world. This war was no simple border dispute. It was a battle of wills, pride, and survival. Hannibal's march toward Italy was not just a campaign of conquest. It was a calculated strike against Rome's very soul. And it all began with that fateful siege, where the stakes were raised and the die was cast for one of history's deadliest clashes: Hannibal's vow of vengeance. Hannibal Barca was no ordinary general. Born into a world of endless conflict, his life was forged in fire from the very beginning. As a boy, he watched his father, Hannibal Barca, wage war against Rome with relentless fury. At his father's side, Hannibal learned early that Rome was not just an enemy. It was the enemy, the heart of a power that must be broken. When Hannibal swore his oath, it was more than words. Before the ancient gods, in a moment sealed by blood and steel, he pledged eternal hatred for Rome. This vow was the compass that would guide his every move, every march, every battle, every sacrifice. He was driven by a vision of revenge, a mission to shatter Rome's dominance and avenge Carthage's earlier defeats. Hannibal's resolve shaped his strategy. He knew that to conquer Rome, brute force alone would not suffice. He needed to strike at its pride, to humiliate the Great Republic in a way that would echo through history. His campaigns would be daring, audacious, and ruthless, designed to dismantle Rome's will as much as its armies. This was a man who embraced war not just as a means, but as a destiny. Hannibal's vow was not merely personal. It became a symbol for Carthage, a rallying cry for an entire nation locked in a deadly struggle against Rome's expanding empire. And it was this burning desire for vengeance that would lead him to the fields of Cannae, where history would witness the deadliest trap ever set: Rome's fatal underestimation of Hannibal. Rome's mighty Senate and generals saw Hannibal as just another rebellious foe, a foreign threat they could crush with sheer numbers and discipline. They believed their legions, drilled to perfection and backed by an empire's resources, were unstoppable. What they did not grasp was the fierce resolve burning inside Hannibal, nor the depths of his cunning. Rome assumed Hannibal's boldness would falter in the face of adversity, that his army, far from home and weakened by the treacherous Alpine crossing, would crumble quickly. They dismissed his moves as reckless gambles rather than calculated strikes. This arrogance blinded them to the real danger, a leader whose mind was a battlefield of strategies designed to outwit and annihilate. This critical misjudgment set Rome on a deadly path. Confident and overextended, they marched into the very traps Hannibal meticulously prepared. What Rome saw as overconfidence was in truth the calm, before a storm of tactical brilliance. They underestimated not only Hannibal's army, but the very nature of the war he waged. A war of wit, patience, and ruthless precision. This oversight would cost Rome dearly. Their failure to comprehend Hannibal's resolve and tactical genius planted the seeds for one of the bloodiest, most humiliating defeats in their history. And so, with Rome blinded by pride, Hannibal prepared to rewrite the rules of war forever. Chapter 2: The Road Less Traveled, Hannibal's legendary Alpine march. Hannibal's decision to march his army across the towering Alps was nothing short of madness. The mountains were steep, jagged, and cloaked in bitter winter cold. Snow and ice made every step a battle, the air thin and cruel. Yet, Hannibal knew this was the only way to strike at the heart of Rome from an unexpected direction. With thousands of men, cavalry, and even war elephants, beasts unaccustomed to freezing mountain passes, he set out on this treacherous path. The journey was brutal. Men slipped and fell to their deaths. Horses collapsed under the weight of their loads. Elephants, massive and mighty, struggled to keep their footing on icy ledges. Food was scarce, and starvation gnawed at the troops. Avalanches thundered down slopes, crushing men and animals alike. Disease and exhaustion spread through the ranks, thinning their numbers with each agonizing mile. Hannibal's leadership was tested beyond limits. His soldiers faced not just enemy armies, but nature itself. Despite these overwhelming odds, Hannibal pressed forward. His determination was unshakable. He understood the element of surprise was worth every hardship endured. By the time his battered force emerged from the mountains into Italy, their arrival stunned the Romans. No one expected an army, especially with elephants, to survive such a passage. This Alpine crossing was a feat of endurance and cunning, a statement that Hannibal was unlike any foe Rome had ever faced. It shattered the myth of invincibility around the Alps and marked the beginning of a relentless campaign that would shake the very foundations of the Roman Republic. The catastrophic losses and Hannibal's tactical genius. The Alpine crossing nearly shattered Hannibal's army to pieces. From an initial force of tens of thousands, barely half emerged alive on the Italian side. Men were lost to freezing winds, avalanches, and starvation. Entire units vanished into the mountain mists, swallowed by the unforgiving terrain. Horses and elephants, symbols of strength and intimidation, succumbed to exhaustion and cold. Yet, amidst this destruction, Hannibal's brilliance turned disaster into advantage. He adapted his tactics on the fly, reorganizing shattered units and blending diverse troops, from Iberian warriors to Numidian cavalry, into a fighting force bound by loyalty and fear of their leader. His calm under pressure kept his men focused, transforming despair into fierce determination. Hannibal's keen understanding of terrain and timing allowed him to avoid larger Roman forces waiting in the valleys below. He chose routes that minimized exposure and prepared ambushes that broke the morale of enemy scouts sent to harass his march. Every painful step across the Alps was a calculated risk, part of a greater strategy to strike Rome where it least expected. This journey was not just a test of endurance, it was the birth of a tactical mastermind's campaign. The losses were staggering, but Hannibal's leadership ensured the core of his army survived, hardened and ready. What emerged from the snow-covered peaks was no broken force, but a lean, deadly instrument of war, poised to challenge Rome's dominance on its own soil. Hannibal's bold gamble stuns Rome. When Hannibal's battered army finally emerged from the shadow of the Alps, the Romans were stunned into disbelief. No one in Rome had imagined that such a perilous journey could be completed, let alone with elephants, creatures thought impossible to bring across frozen mountain passes. This bold move shattered Rome's sense of security. Hannibal's arrival was more than a military maneuver. It was a psychological strike aimed directly at the Roman heart. His fearless leadership inspired loyalty in his men and struck fear into his enemies. The message was clear. Hannibal would take risks no one else dared, and he would bring the war straight to Rome's doorstep. The shock rippled through the Senate and the legions alike. Roman commanders scrambled to respond, but Hannibal's audacity had already rewritten the rules of engagement. By choosing this impossible route, he gained the element of surprise, forcing Rome to fight on terms they had never anticipated. This was not just a crossing of mountains. It was a declaration of war with a roar. Hannibal had proven that cunning, courage, and relentless will could overturn even the greatest odds. The stage was set for a clash that would test the very limits of strategy, endurance, and ambition. Rome's enemy was no ordinary general. He was a force of nature, and the war was about to become a nightmare Rome could not escape. Chapter 3. The Clash of Titans. The Roman army versus Carthaginian forces. Rome's military was a well-oiled machine built on discipline, organization, and tradition. At its core were the legions, groups of heavy infantry soldiers, armed with short swords, large shields, and javelins. These legions were supported by cavalry units and allied troops, all trained to fight in tight, flexible formations. Rome's strength came not just from numbers, but from the soldiers' unyielding loyalty and the legion's ability to adapt on the battlefield. In 216 BCE, Rome called upon two consuls to lead its forces, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. These men embodied different approaches to warfare and leadership, a fact that would shape the fate of their army. Paulus was cautious and experienced, known for careful planning and discipline. Varro, on the other hand, was bold, even reckless, eager to press attacks and take swift action. Together, their command reflected the Roman Senate's urgency to crush Hannibal quickly. Their strategy was straightforward: amass overwhelming numbers, confront Hannibal head-on, and rely on the legion's strength to break the enemy lines. They planned to use sheer force to overpower Carthage's smaller army, believing that weight of numbers and Roman discipline would decide the battle. Yet, this dual leadership also brought tension. The consuls shared command, but often disagreed on tactics, which affected coordination and decision-making. While Rome trusted in the legion's ability to fight as a united front, this division at the top would become a critical weakness when Hannibal unleashed his own tactical genius. As these consuls prepared to face Hannibal, their choices and their contrasting styles would set the stage for a brutal confrontation where strategy, leadership, and the fate of empires hung in the balance. The Carthaginian army, a mosaic of war. Hannibal's army was a striking contrast to Rome's legions. It was not a single uniform force, but a diverse assembly of warriors drawn from across the ancient world. His infantry was a mix of fiercely skilled soldiers, tough Iberian swordsmen, hardy Celtiberians, and African foot soldiers hardened by desert battle. Each brought unique fighting styles, strengths, and tactics, creating a force both versatile and unpredictable. What truly set Hannibal apart was his cavalry, the swift, deadly Numidian horsemen, masters of hit-and-run tactics, and the heavy cavalry from Carthage's homeland, trained to crash enemy lines with brute force. This elite cavalry provided mobility Rome's legions struggled to match, and was essential for executing Hannibal's complex battlefield maneuvers. Then there were the war elephants, massive beasts armored and trained to break enemy formations. Though not always reliable in battle, their sheer size and terror caused chaos among unprepared troops. For Rome, these giants were as much psychological weapons as physical ones. Adding to this mix were mercenaries, fighters from Gaul, Spain, and North Africa, drawn by gold, bound by loyalty to Hannibal's leadership rather than a single nation. This patchwork army required careful command, but it gave Hannibal an edge, a blend of tactics and fierce determination that defied the straightforward discipline of the Roman legions. This diverse force was a living weapon, flexible and adaptive. Hannibal's skill lay not just in fighting, but in melding this complex army into a single, coordinated force, capable of overwhelming even the most disciplined enemy through surprise, speed, and ruthless precision. Psychological warfare and morale, discipline versus battle-hardened resolve. On the surface, Rome's legions projected an image of unbreakable discipline. Years of training forged soldiers who followed orders without question, fought in tight formations, and believed in the might of the Republic. Their confidence was rooted in structure and routine, a predictable force built to endure the chaos of war. In stark contrast, Hannibal's army was a patchwork of fierce warriors shaped by countless battles across different lands. These men were not molded by formal drills, but by raw experience. Each fought with personal skill and a hunger born of survival in harsh conditions. Though united under Hannibal's command, the army's diverse origins meant it lacked the rigid discipline of Rome's legions. This difference played a crucial role in the psychological war waged even before the first sword was drawn. The Romans often underestimated Hannibal's men, seeing them as unruly mercenaries rather than a formidable force. Meanwhile, Hannibal knew how to exploit this arrogance, using bold moves and unexpected tactics to unsettle Roman commanders and soldiers alike. Morale within Hannibal's ranks was bolstered by a shared belief in their leader's vision and a fierce desire to avenge Carthage's losses. They fought not just for territory, but for survival and honor. For Rome, witnessing Hannibal's unorthodox strategies and the resilience of his troops sowed doubt and fear, cracks in the armor of their famed legions. This clash of mindsets, disciplined order versus gritty experience, set the stage for a battle where mental endurance would prove as deadly as any sword. Hannibal's psychological mastery prepared his army to face the mighty Roman machine with confidence and cunning, ready to turn the tide of history. The players behind the battle, allies, commanders, and rivalries. While Hannibal was the mastermind of Carthage's campaign, he was far from alone on the battlefield. At his side was Hasdrubal, his brother and trusted lieutenant, a skilled commander tasked with holding Carthaginian positions in Spain and guarding crucial supply lines. Hasdrubal's role was vital. Without his steady hand, Hannibal's daring advances risked collapse. Then there was Maharbal, Hannibal's cavalry commander and a warrior renowned for his swift, aggressive tactics. Maharbal's cavalry was the hammer to Hannibal's anvil, striking at Roman flanks with lightning speed and disrupting enemy formations. His leadership was key to the execution of complex maneuvers that would later define the battle. On the Roman side, command was anything but unified. Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro shared consulship, but their rivalry ran deep. Paulus was the experienced, cautious general who favored careful, measured moves. Varro was the impulsive, aggressive commander eager for decisive action. Their differing philosophies created tension that would fracture Roman command decisions at critical moments. These political rivalries extended beyond the battlefield into the Senate itself, where power struggles influenced military strategies and appointments. The pressure to deliver swift victory led to reckless choices, amplifying the risks Rome faced against Hannibal's disciplined cunning. Understanding these key figures and the complex dynamics among commanders reveals the layered human drama behind the bloodshed. The clash at Cannae was not just between armies, it was a contest of leadership, ambition, and fragile alliances, all converging on a day that would rewrite history. Chapter 4. Setting the stage. The battlefield at Cannae. The plains near Cannae in southeastern Italy offered a vast, open space, flat, wide, and bordered by two shallow rivers. This land was more than just ground for battle. It was a natural trap waiting to be sprung. Hannibal chose this site with ruthless calculation, understanding every rise, riverbank, and patch of earth that could be turned to his advantage. The flatness of the plain meant that Roman legions could deploy their deep infantry formations without obstruction, encouraging their usual confidence in crushing enemies with weight and numbers. But this same openness worked against them. Without natural cover or escape routes, their large army risked being surrounded. Nearby, the small rivers and gentle rises formed natural barriers that Hannibal could use to funnel Roman forces into tight spaces. The rivers hemmed in the Roman flanks, limiting their maneuverability and sealing their fate once the trap was set. Meanwhile, Hannibal positioned his troops to exploit this geography, leaving his center lightly held while his stronger cavalry and infantry waited patiently on the flanks. The land at Cannae was not chosen by chance. It was a battlefield Hannibal had studied meticulously. Here, the terrain itself would help him execute his deadly plan, turning Rome's strength into a deadly weakness. Every foot of soil worked in Hannibal's favor, setting the stage for the most devastating ambush in ancient warfare. Deployment and the opening moves. As dawn broke over Cannae, the Roman army arrayed itself in a massive formation, 6 ranks deep, their infantry packed tightly like an iron wall. Their intent was to drive straight through Hannibal's center with overwhelming force. Varro, confident in Roman discipline and strength, placed his legions front and center, eager for a decisive breakthrough. On their flanks, Roman cavalry were positioned to hold and outflank the enemy's horsemen. Hannibal, however, deployed his forces with deliberate subtlety. His infantry formed a crescent-shaped line, with the center curved gently forward but purposely thinner than the Roman front. This convex shape was a calculated weakness designed to draw the Romans in. His strongest infantry and cavalry were placed on the flanks, hidden slightly behind the curve, ready to spring into action. The Numidian cavalry took position on the far left, light and fast, prepared to engage and then outmaneuver their Roman counterparts. On the right flank stood the heavy Carthaginian cavalry, waiting to charge with brutal power. Behind the infantry, hidden from view, stood Hannibal's reserves, ready to exploit any opening. As battle commenced, Hannibal's center slowly gave ground under the Roman push, appearing to falter. This was no retreat but a carefully planned lure, pulling the Romans deeper into the trap. The Romans, sensing advantage, pressed harder into what seemed like a collapsing enemy line, unaware they were marching into an encirclement that would soon seal their doom. Every troop placement, every movement, was part of a deadly dance choreographed by Hannibal's tactical genius. This deployment was the first step in a trap that would go down in history as the bloodiest and most brilliant ambush ever executed. Chapter 5. The Art of Deception, Hannibal's Tactical Genius Revealed. The double envelopment tactic that Hannibal unleashed at Cannae was a masterpiece of military cunning, a trap designed not just to fight the enemy, but to completely surround and crush them. The enemies were so confident they charge headlong, only to find themselves encircled by blades and horses on every side, with no way out. Hannibal's plan began with a bold gamble. His center would hold fewer troops and slowly yield ground under the Roman assault. This was no sign of weakness, but a calculated invitation. By pulling his center backward, he lured the Romans deeper into a deadly embrace. The Romans, seeing what appeared to be a retreat, pressed forward harder, eager to break through what they thought was a faltering line. Meanwhile, Hannibal's strongest forces, his elite infantry and cavalry, waited on the flanks, ready to spring the trap. The trap tightens, Rome's final descent into the kill zone. With every step the Romans advanced, the trap closed tighter. From the flanks, Hannibal's hidden infantry moved inward, like a predator's jaws snapping shut. On both sides, Carthaginian cavalry clashed fiercely with their Roman counterparts, slowly pushing them back and cutting off any chance of relief. As the Romans pressed deeper, the crescent of Hannibal's forces curved inward, transforming the battlefield into a deadly cage. The sun beat down as panic flickered among the legionaries, their ranks tightening, but their options shrinking. Messages of command struggled to reach the front. Confusion spread as the realization dawned. They were encircled. The Romans found themselves boxed in by enemy lines on all sides. Escape routes vanished behind them, blocked by cavalry and infantry alike. Trapped and desperate, the legions were forced to fight in every direction, their tight formation now a liability that made them easy targets. The tension reached a deadly crescendo as the Romans tried to break free, but Hannibal's trap held firm. The more they struggled, the more the noose tightened. In this moment, the battlefield became a slaughterhouse. The air filled with the cries of men fighting for their lives, surrounded on every side by the merciless enemy. This was no ordinary defeat. It was annihilation. The trap, set with cold precision and ruthless patience, had claimed its prize. Rome's greatest army was broken, crushed under a plan so brilliant and brutal, it would echo through history as the deadliest military trap ever set. Chapter 6. The Slaughter, Rome's darkest hour. The field at Cannae became a scene of unimaginable carnage. As the Roman legions found themselves encircled, their numbers were crushed beneath an unrelenting Carthaginian assault. Thousands fell in brutal close combat. Soldiers hacked down by swords, pierced by spears, and trampled under hooves. The ground, once firm beneath their feet, soon turned slick with blood, marking the scale of destruction. The chaos was overwhelming. Men fought not for glory, but simply to survive. Soldiers struggled to hold their ground, backs against their comrades, faces etched with fear and desperation. Some screamed for help. Others fought silently, eyes fixed on a distant hope of escape that never came. The relentless pressure of the Carthaginian forces left no respite, no quarter. Generals were not spared. Lucius Aemilius Paulus fell in the thick of battle, cut down while rallying his troops. His death sent shockwaves through the Roman ranks, further shaking morale. Gaius Terentius Varro narrowly escaped, but his flight did little to stem the tide of defeat. The psychological trauma was as brutal as the physical slaughter. Men witnessed friends and commanders fall beside them, the horror of slaughter eroding their will to fight. The once disciplined legions became a trapped mass, broken and disoriented, trapped in a living nightmare. By the end of the day, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lay dead, one of the bloodiest single-day battles in history. Cannae was not just a defeat, it was a massacre, a testament to the deadly efficiency of Hannibal's trap and the high cost of Roman hubris. The cost of victory, Carthaginian losses, reveal Hannibal's efficiency. While the Roman legions were decimated on the fields of Cannae, Hannibal's Carthaginian forces paid a far lighter price. Estimates suggest Carthaginian casualties numbered around 8,000, significantly lower than the tens of thousands lost by Rome. This disparity underscores the brutal efficiency of Hannibal's double envelopment. Hannibal's strategy was not merely to win, but to destroy the enemy's fighting capacity while preserving his own army's strength. His troops maneuvered with precision, avoiding unnecessary risk while delivering crushing blows. The careful coordination of infantry and cavalry ensured that Carthaginian forces remained flexible and cohesive even in the heat of battle. This balance between ruthless attack and disciplined defense allowed Hannibal to maintain a fighting force capable of continuing the campaign. It was a testament to his genius, not just in tactics, but in understanding the harsh economics of war. Cannae was a masterclass in inflicting maximum damage while minimizing one's own losses, a lesson that military leaders study even today. In the blood-soaked aftermath, the sharp contrast in casualties stood as clear proof. Hannibal's trap had worked exactly as intended. Rome suffered a catastrophic blow, but Carthage emerged battle-ready, poised to prolong the war, with an army that had survived and thrived under the most harrowing conditions. Chapter 7. The aftermath. Rome, shaken but not broken. The shock of Cannae sent ripples of panic crashing through Rome's streets and Senate halls. News of the catastrophic defeat ignited fear and disbelief. The Republic's very survival seemed at stake. Panic spread like wildfire among the populace, who feared the war was lost and Rome itself might fall. The Senate scrambled to respond, calling urgent meetings that exposed deep fractures in leadership. Voices demanded swift reform, new strategies, renewed armies, and decisive action to prevent further disaster. The humiliating loss shattered confidence in existing commanders, triggering rapid shifts in political and military leadership. Experienced generals were recalled, new consuls appointed, and the Roman war machine forced into urgent overhaul. Rome's traditional strategies were questioned. The Senate embraced more cautious defensive tactics, inspired by the emerging approach of Fabius Maximus, who preached patience and attrition over reckless confrontation. This marked a turning point. Rome had to adapt or face complete annihilation. In this moment of crisis, Rome's resilience was tested. The political chaos was real, but so was the determination to survive. The Republic faced not just an external enemy, but internal turmoil that demanded bold decisions. The immediate aftermath of Cannae was a war on two fronts, against Hannibal's army and the crumbling confidence within Rome itself. Rome's defiant spirit, refusal to surrender. Despite the crushing losses at Cannae, Rome refused to surrender. The Republic's heart beat fiercely with a stubborn resilience that no defeat could extinguish. Calls for peace or negotiation were drowned out by a collective will to fight on, to rebuild what had been shattered. This refusal was not born from blind pride, but from a profound belief in Rome's destiny. The Senate, the people, and the surviving legions shared a determination to endure, adapt, and ultimately prevail. New armies were raised swiftly, recruiting men from every corner of the Republic, including those who had never worn armor before. Rome's resilience was a testament to its social and political structure, an empire fueled by civic duty and an unyielding sense of unity. Even as Hannibal roamed Italian lands, no city surrendered willingly. No alliance with Rome broke easily. Instead, Rome dug in, prepared for a long war of attrition, confident that time and sacrifice would turn the tide. This relentless spirit transformed Rome from a defeated army into an indomitable force. It set the stage for a drawn-out conflict, where strategy and patience became Rome's weapons. The Republic's refusal to accept defeat at Cannae became the foundation of its ultimate recovery and future dominance. Hannibal's dilemma: tactical triumph, strategic frustration. Though Cannae was a masterpiece of battlefield strategy, for Hannibal, it was a victory tinged with frustration. The massacre shattered Rome's army and stunned the ancient world, yet it did not deliver the final blow to the Republic. Hannibal's tactical brilliance had created a near-perfect trap, but the broader war remained unresolved. Hannibal faced a profound dilemma: how to turn this stunning win into lasting conquest. Rome, battered but unbroken, refused to surrender. Cities held fast, alliances remained intact, and the Republic began raising new armies faster than Hannibal could destroy them. His forces, though victorious, were far from reinforced. Supplies dwindled, and reinforcements from Carthage were slow or insufficient. Strategically, Hannibal was isolated deep in enemy territory, far from home support. Without the means to besiege Rome itself or decisively break its power, his campaign risked stagnation. The war had become a grinding conflict of attrition, not the swift conquest he had hoped for. This tension between battlefield success and strategic limitation shaped the course of the Second Punic War. Hannibal's genius on the field could not alone secure victory. It required resources, allies, and time, things Rome was determined to deny him. His triumph at Cannae, while spectacular, was both a high point and a turning point, marking the start of a long and bitter struggle where brilliance met stubborn resilience. The long shadow of Cannae, Hannibal's struggle to capitalize on victory. After the bloodbath at Cannae, Hannibal stood at a crossroads. His victory was monumental, but the war was far from over. He moved swiftly to exploit his advantage, hoping to rally more Italian allies to his cause and push Rome to the brink of collapse. Towns and cities, shaken by the Roman defeat, wavered, and some even defected. Yet, Hannibal's efforts met with limits. Many Italian allies remained loyal to Rome, fearing retribution or doubting Carthage's long-term strength. Hannibal lacked the heavy siege equipment and reinforcements necessary to take Rome itself. His forces, though victorious, were stretched thin, worn down by years of campaigning far from home. Rome, though wounded, regrouped with remarkable speed, raising fresh armies and tightening defenses. Hannibal found himself locked in a grueling war of attrition, chasing a republic that refused to fall. His tactical brilliance on the battlefield was unmatched, but the broader political and logistical challenges blunted his campaign's momentum. The war dragged on, marked by skirmishes, sieges, and shifting alliances. Hannibal's dream of swiftly ending Rome's dominance remained out of reach. Instead, his campaign became a testament to endurance and willpower, a battle of minds and resources that would last years beyond the bloody day at Cannae. This long struggle would define Hannibal's legacy, a general who could win the greatest battles, but could not break the spirit of a determined republic. The trap had worked, but the war had just begun. Chapter 8. The Psychological War, Hannibal's Mind Games. The horror of Cannae left an indelible scar on the Roman psyche. For the soldiers who survived, or even those who heard the tales, the defeat was more than a loss of men and territory. It was a blow to their very spirit. The image of tens of thousands of comrades slaughtered in a single day haunted every legionary, turning confidence into fear. Roman camps were gripped by a mix of dread and determination. The memory of being trapped and butchered filled their minds, breeding anxiety before every new battle. Whispers of Hannibal's ruthless genius spread like wildfire, challenging the belief that Rome's legions were invincible. Yet, this psychological blow forged a paradoxical strength. The terror of Cannae steeled the soldiers' resolve. It became a grim reminder of what was at stake and what they must never allow to happen again. Roman commanders tapped into this fear, transforming it into fierce discipline and unbreakable will. In the wake of Cannae, Rome's soldiers were not simply broken. They were reborn, hardened by trauma, and driven by a burning desire for redemption. The defeat forged a new kind of warrior, one who fought not just for victory, but to erase the nightmare of that deadly trap forever, turning defeat into determination, propaganda, and fear in Rome. In the aftermath of Cannae, Rome faced a critical battle beyond the battlefield, a battle for the hearts and minds of its people. The Senate and leaders knew the staggering defeat could shatter morale, so they turned to propaganda to control the narrative. Instead of allowing despair to take root, they framed the loss as a temporary setback, a challenge to be overcome. Stories circulated of heroic last stands, of soldiers fighting to the bitter end. The horrors of Cannae were used as warnings, reminders of the price of failure and the need for unwavering loyalty to Rome. Fear was harnessed not to paralyze, but to motivate. Citizens were urged to support the war effort with renewed vigor, and recruits flooded the ranks eager to avenge their fallen brothers. This use of propaganda created a powerful paradox. The very fear that could have broken Rome's spirit became a fuel for resilience. Public speeches, ceremonies, and symbols reinforced the idea that Rome was eternal, that defeat was not defeat, but a call to arms. The memory of Cannae became a rallying cry, a dark moment that forged a collective resolve stronger than before. Rome's ability to transform fear into determination was crucial to its survival. It turned loss into purpose and despair into action, setting the stage for a long, brutal struggle that would test not just armies, but the very soul of the Republic. Hannibal's command, charisma, and psychological mastery. Hannibal was more than a general. He was a master of the mind. His charisma electrified his troops, forging a fierce loyalty that transcended the hardships of endless campaigns. Soldiers from diverse backgrounds, Gauls, Iberians, Africans, followed him not just out of duty, but out of belief in his vision and confidence. He understood that war was as much psychological as physical. To his enemies, Hannibal projected an image of unstoppable power and cunning. His tactics were designed to confuse and intimidate, sowing fear before battle even began. Stories of his daring Alpine crossing and the slaughter at Cannae spread rapidly, unsettling Roman commanders and shaking their confidence. Within his ranks, Hannibal's presence was a constant source of inspiration. He led from the front, sharing danger and hardship, earning respect through action. His speeches fired up weary men, reminding them of their purpose and the glory that awaited. By shaping both fear and hope, Hannibal controlled the battlefield before the first sword was drawn. This psychological warfare, wielded with charisma and tactical brilliance, was a critical weapon in Hannibal's arsenal. It united his army in purpose and paralyzed his foes with doubt, making his greatest victories not just feats of arms, but triumphs of the mind. Chapter 9. The Roman Comeback, Fabius Maximus, and the Strategy of Patience. In the aftermath of disaster, Rome turned to a new kind of leadership, one that rejected rash charges and sought survival through caution. Quintus Fabius Maximus, known as Cunctator or the Delayer, rose to prominence with a strategy that confounded many Romans. Rather than meeting Hannibal head-on, Fabius chose to avoid direct battle, focusing instead on wearing down the enemy over time. His tactics were simple yet revolutionary: harass Hannibal's supply lines, cut off resources, and refuse to engage in pitched battles where the Carthaginians' tactical genius could dominate. Fabius understood that Rome could not match Hannibal's battlefield brilliance, so he aimed to outlast him. His approach frustrated both Hannibal and the Roman public, who longed for swift revenge. But patience became Rome's weapon. By avoiding unnecessary risks and conserving their forces, Fabius's tactics slowly chipped away at Hannibal's strength. He forced the Carthaginian general into a war of attrition, a grinding contest of endurance rather than spectacular clashes. Fabius's strategy changed the course of the war. It transformed Roman warfare from a pursuit of immediate glory into a calculated campaign of survival and persistence. His legacy would be one of steady, relentless pressure, laying the groundwork for Rome's eventual triumph. Rome's adaptation, resisting Hannibal's genius. After the devastation at Cannae, Rome learned a harsh lesson. Direct confrontation with Hannibal's army spelled disaster. The Republic adjusted quickly, shifting from reckless aggression to cautious endurance. Rome's generals embraced strategies that avoided full-scale battles, knowing that Hannibal's tactical brilliance could dismantle even their strongest forces. Instead of seeking glory through swift victories, Rome focused on rebuilding its strength, raising new legions, training fresh recruits, and fortifying key positions. Supply lines were protected, and smaller skirmishes were fought carefully to harass Hannibal without risking annihilation. This refusal to engage Hannibal on his terms frustrated the Carthaginian general. Each battle Rome avoided drained his resources and morale. The Republic became a fortress of patience, wearing down Hannibal's momentum over years rather than days. By adapting their strategy, Rome transformed the war into a slow grind, refusing to be lured into traps or decisive engagements. This resilience and strategic patience turned Hannibal's greatest advantage into a liability, setting the stage for Rome's eventual recovery and ultimate victory. Rome's resilience, battles and strategies after Cannae. After the catastrophe at Cannae, Rome did not crumble. It regrouped and fought back with relentless determination. Key battles following this defeat showcased Rome's ability to learn, adapt, and endure against seemingly insurmountable odds. One such battle was at Lake Trasimene, where Rome employed ambush tactics to weaken Hannibal's forces, signaling a shift toward more cautious and calculated engagements. Then came the Fabian strategy itself, avoiding direct clashes and focusing on cutting off Hannibal's supply lines, denying him the resources needed to sustain his campaign. The siege of Capua was another turning point. Rome moved swiftly to isolate one of Hannibal's most important allies, demonstrating that the Republic was now taking the fight to Carthage's supporters and breaking their hold on Italy. Each of these actions reflected a new Rome, one that refused to be baited into reckless battles, and instead wore down the enemy through persistence and strategy. Rome's resilience was forged not in a single day, but in years of calculated pressure, patience, and unyielding resolve, setting the stage for the eventual Roman victory. Shifting loyalties and the fractured peninsula, Hannibal's stunning victory at Cannae sent shockwaves far beyond the battlefield. It fractured the fragile web of alliances that held the Italian peninsula together. Rome had built its empire not just on legions, but on a vast network of allied city-states and tribes, bound by treaties, fear, and promises of protection. But Hannibal's triumph exposed cracks in this alliance system. Many Italian allies, once proud partners of Rome, began to question their loyalties. Cities that had long supported Rome weighed their options carefully. Should they stand by a republic bloodied but unbroken, or seize the moment to join Hannibal's seemingly unstoppable force? The fear of Roman retribution clashed with the hope of freedom from Rome's heavy hand. Several key allies switched sides, opening their gates to Carthaginian forces or disrupting Roman supply lines. This wave of defections complicated Rome's efforts, stretching their resources and forcing generals to fight not only Hannibal's army, but a civil war of shifting allegiances. Meanwhile, Hannibal welcomed these new recruits, swelling his ranks with troops hungry for change. Yet, many Italian states remained fiercely loyal to Rome, driven by tradition, self-interest, or distrust of Hannibal's foreign rule. This patchwork of loyalty and rebellion turned the Italian peninsula into a volatile battlefield beyond the armies alone. A war within a war, where every city's allegiance could tip the balance. Hannibal's victory did not just shatter Roman armies, it shook the foundations of Rome's empire, turning friends into foes and allies into battlegrounds. The struggle for the hearts of Italy became as decisive as any clash of swords. Carthage's silence and the expanding warfront. While Hannibal stood victorious in Italy, thousands of miles from home, Carthage remained frustratingly silent. The Senate in Carthage, slow and divided, hesitated to fully support his bold campaign. Political infighting, economic caution, and fear of overextension held back the reinforcements he desperately needed. Despite sending the Republic of Rome to its knees at Cannae, Hannibal's cries for siege equipment, fresh troops, and supplies went unanswered. Carthage's leaders feared committing everything to a single front, even when that front was delivering the most brilliant victories in their history. Back in Italy, Hannibal's forces were isolated, cut off from meaningful support. He could win battles, but he could not win the war alone. While his enemies regrouped and rearmed, Carthage stalled, and that delay would cost them everything. Meanwhile, Rome shifted its attention to the broader war theater. If Hannibal couldn't be crushed in Italy, then Carthage's strength would be torn down elsewhere. Roman commanders launched counterattacks in Spain, where Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, fought to hold Carthaginian ground. Fierce battles erupted along the Iberian coast, each clash draining Carthage of men, money, and morale. In North Africa, Rome began to prod at Carthage's own doorstep, threatening their homeland and forcing the Senate to divide their attention between defending the empire and supporting Hannibal. The war that had started in Italy was now fought across 3 continents, on sea, in city walls, and through burning plains. Carthage's hesitation in sending reinforcements became a fatal hesitation. While Hannibal fought like a lion in enemy territory, the ground beneath Carthage's empire cracked and splintered, and Rome, once nearly broken, began its long, merciless counterstroke across every front. Chapter 11. How Cannae became the textbook example of battlefield encirclement and tactical mastery. The Battle of Cannae stands as a timeless lesson in military strategy, a moment when battlefield tactics were elevated to an art form. Hannibal's execution of the double envelopment was so precise, so devastating, that it redefined how commanders would think about encirclement forever. For centuries, Cannae became the standard by which great battles were judged. Military leaders studied the way Hannibal deliberately weakened his center, inviting the enemy forward, only to have his flanks close like a vice around the Romans. This perfect coordination of infantry and cavalry to trap and annihilate an enemy force showcased a level of control and foresight rarely seen. Textbooks from ancient times through the modern era reference Cannae as the quintessential example of how to use terrain, timing, and troop placement to surround and destroy an opponent. It showed that victory is not always about who has the most soldiers, but who commands the field with intelligence and patience. From generals on horseback in the medieval era to modern strategists planning armored assaults, Cannae's lessons echo across history. It is a battle that transcends its time, a masterclass in how to turn an enemy's strength against them through the perfect trap, forever etched into the playbook of warfare. The enduring influence, from Napoleon to World War II generals. The Battle of Cannae didn't just reshape ancient warfare, it cast a long shadow over military thought for centuries to come. From the smoke-filled fields of 19th century Europe to the mechanized battlegrounds of the 20th century, commanders turned to Hannibal's tactics for inspiration. Napoleon Bonaparte, a man obsessed with rapid, decisive victories, studied Cannae closely. He admired how Hannibal used mobility and encirclement to defeat larger armies. Napoleon's own campaigns, marked by swift maneuvers and enveloping attacks, echo the lessons Hannibal taught over 2,000 years earlier. In the trenches and deserts of World War I and II, generals like Erwin Rommel and George Patton recognized Cannae's strategic genius. They sought to surround enemy forces quickly, cutting off retreat and supply lines. The concept of the pincer movement became a staple in modern warfare, a direct descendant of Hannibal's deadly embrace at Cannae. Even today, military academies around the world dissect Cannae's tactics, teaching new generations the art of encirclement and battlefield control. The battle serves as a stark reminder that sometimes brilliance and boldness can overcome even the greatest numbers, and that understanding your enemy's mind is as vital as any weapon. Cannae's legacy lives on, a timeless guide for commanders seeking not just to win battles, but to master the deadly chess game of war. The myth and legend. Cannae in history, literature, and culture. Cannae's story didn't end on the battlefield. It grew into legend, woven into the fabric of history and culture across centuries. Writers, poets, and historians transformed the blood-soaked plains of Apulia into a stage for tales of genius, betrayal, and tragic heroism. In Roman literature, Cannae was both a cautionary tale and a source of pride, an example of how even the greatest setbacks could forge a stronger republic. It became a symbol of resilience and a warning against hubris. Later, Renaissance scholars resurrected its lessons, inspiring military treatises that blended classical wisdom with emerging ideas of warfare. In modern times, Cannae found its way into novels, plays, and films, portrayed as the ultimate battle of wits and courage. Its name became synonymous with the perfect trap, a phrase used metaphorically beyond the battlefield to describe any situation where overwhelming force is cleverly outmaneuvered. Even today, Cannae captivates minds worldwide, military strategists, historians, and storytellers alike, reminding us that history is not just dates and facts, but a living saga of human ambition, brilliance, and the brutal costs of war. Cannae is not just a battle, it is a legend etched into human consciousness, teaching lessons that transcend time and continue to inspire awe and reflection. Chapter 12. Voices from the Bloodied Field. Personal stories of soldiers in the massacre. Behind the sweeping strategies and grand battles of Cannae lie the stories of men, soldiers from both sides caught in a deadly struggle for survival. For the Roman legionaries, the day was a nightmare carved into memory. They marched with confidence, only to find themselves trapped in a deadly embrace, fighting not just for victory, but for their very lives. One Roman soldier recalled the horror as friends fell beside him, the air thick with dust, blood, and screams. Surrounded on all sides, there was no room to maneuver, no hope to flee. Some fought with desperate courage, wielding their swords until their strength failed. Others felt the cold grip of fear as the Carthaginian cavalry closed in, cutting off any chance of escape. On the Carthaginian side, tales speak of warriors who fought with fierce pride and loyalty to Hannibal. For many, it was a moment of glory, an opportunity to strike a decisive blow against Rome's mighty legions. Yet even among the victors, there was respect for the ferocity of their foes. The carnage was brutal, and survival required both skill and luck. These personal stories remind us that war is not just about tactics or empires. It is about individuals caught in the tides of history. Men who faced terror, showed bravery, and paid the ultimate price. Their voices echo through time, giving life to the brutal reality beneath the legend of Cannae. Chapter 12. Conclusion. The crushing toll. Psychological and physical costs of war on both sides. War is a savage teacher, and Cannae taught lessons paid for in blood and broken bodies. For Roman soldiers, the physical toll was horrific. Endless hours in harsh sun, blood-soaked armor, wounds that refused to heal. Many marched on despite exhaustion, hunger, and the loss of comrades, their bodies pushed to the brink of collapse. The psychological scars ran even deeper. Survivors carried nightmares of being trapped, surrounded, and helpless. The memories of screams, fallen friends, and the cold grip of death haunted their dreams. Fear and trauma shadowed every soldier, breaking some, hardening others into warriors fueled by vengeance. On the Carthaginian side, the price was no less real. Hannibal's troops faced brutal conditions. Long campaigns far from home, hunger, and the relentless strain of battle. The constant fight to maintain discipline among a diverse army took mental and emotional strength. Victory did not erase the pain of loss or the weariness etched into every face. Both armies bore wounds that went beyond flesh, deep in their minds and souls. Cannae was not just a battle. It was a crucible that tested the limits of human endurance and spirit. The cost of such war echoes through history, a stark reminder that behind every tactic lies the raw reality of suffering. Chapter 13. Nature's Battlefield: How Italy's Geography and Weather Shaped the War. Italy's landscape was as much a player in this war as the armies themselves. From the jagged peaks of the Apennines slicing through the peninsula to the sprawling marshlands and fertile plains, the terrain dictated the moves of both Hannibal and Rome. It wasn't just the soldiers clashing, it was nature testing their limits. The Apennines presented brutal challenges. Narrow mountain passes slowed Hannibal's legendary Alpine crossing and later restricted the movement of armies, forcing commanders to adapt or face deadly ambushes. Rivers, winding through valleys and lowlands, acted as natural barriers or traps. Battles were often fought near these waterways, where control of a bridge or ford could turn the tide. Dense forest provided cover for surprise attacks, but also concealed dangers. Roman and Carthaginian scouts had to navigate these shadowy realms carefully. The plains offered room for open combat, but left armies vulnerable to encirclement, as Cannae proved. Then there was the weather. Italy's extremes tested the endurance of every soldier. Scorching heat drained strength during summer marches, while sudden rainstorms turned battlefields into muddy quagmires, sapping the effectiveness of weapons and armor. Cold snaps in the mountains froze men and animals alike, making survival as much a battle against nature as against the enemy. Hannibal's genius lay not only in his tactics, but in his ability to read and use the land and weather to his advantage. For Rome, overcoming Italy's natural challenges became part of their hard-fought road to eventual victory. In this war, understanding the environment was as critical as understanding the enemy. Hannibal's mastery of terrain and the crushing logistics of war. Hannibal's greatest weapon was not just his army. It was his ability to use the land itself as a force multiplier. Faced with Roman armies far larger than his own, he turned Italy's rugged and unpredictable terrain into an ally. He lured enemies into narrow passes where their numbers counted for little. He chose battlegrounds where his diverse troops, from nimble Numidian cavalry to fierce Iberian infantry, could exploit the landscape's advantages. Surprise attacks hidden by forests and hills became routine, unbalancing the disciplined Romans. Hannibal's knowledge of local geography allowed him to strike where the enemy least expected, forcing the Romans to fight on unfavorable terms time and again. Yet behind every maneuver was a brutal logistical reality. Moving tens of thousands of men, cavalry, and even war elephants across rocky mountains, marshes, and winding rivers was a nightmare. Supplies ran low, paths became impassable, and soldiers battled hunger and exhaustion as much as the enemy. Each campaign was a race against nature itself. Despite these challenges, Hannibal's skill kept his army moving and fighting, turning obstacles into opportunities. His campaign was a testament to the power of terrain knowledge and adaptability, lessons in how nature, when mastered, could level the playing field against overwhelming odds. Chapter 14. War's Shadow: The devastation of Italy's towns and countryside. The war between Rome and Carthage was fought not only by armies, but over the very land and people of Italy itself. Towns and villages, once peaceful homes, became battlegrounds, their streets soaked with blood and fear. Fields that fed entire regions were trampled or burned, turning fertile soil into barren wastelands. Civilians bore the brunt of this relentless conflict. Families were uprooted, forced to flee from advancing armies or seek shelter behind crumbling walls. The chaos of siege and occupation brought starvation as crops failed. Granaries emptied and supply lines were cut. Hunger gnawed at bodies weakened by fear and hardship. Survival became a daily struggle. Some endured harsh winters, hiding in ruined homes or dense forests. Others faced brutal occupation, caught between the demands of conquering forces and the loyalty they still held for Rome or Carthage. Resistance simmered in secret, while many were driven to desperate acts just to live another day. These stories of suffering remind us that war's true cost lies far beyond the battlefield. The destruction of Italy's towns and countryside forged scars that would last generations, shaping not just the course of the war, but the very soul of a nation fighting to endure. Chapter 14 continued. Shadows within, civilian resistance, espionage, and the fracturing of Italy. The war that raged across Italy was not fought only by soldiers on the battlefield. It was also a silent, deadly conflict waged in the shadows by civilians caught between loyalty and survival. Resistance movements sprouted in towns under Carthaginian occupation, where ordinary men and women risked their lives to sabotage supplies, relay secret information, and strike at enemy forces. Espionage became a deadly game of whispers and shadows. Spies slipped through war-torn villages and contested borders, carrying secrets that could turn the tide. Intelligence gathered by these brave civilians helped Rome anticipate Hannibal's moves, while Carthage relied on local sympathizers to keep their campaigns alive. But the war also sowed deep divisions within communities. Families were torn apart as neighbors chose sides, some collaborating with the invaders for protection or gain, others fiercely loyal to Rome. This betrayal bred suspicion and fear, fracturing the social bonds that had held Italian towns together for generations. In the aftermath, Italy's social fabric was forever changed. Trust was broken, alliances shattered, and a landscape of fear and uncertainty replaced once thriving communities. The war was not just a battle for land and power. It was a conflict that reshaped the very heart of Italy, leaving scars deeper than any sword could carve. Chapter 15. Hannibal's leadership style, the man behind the legend. Hannibal's genius as a commander was not just in his tactics, but in his remarkable ability to lead an army made up of soldiers from every corner of the known world. His ranks were a melting pot of cultures: Carthaginians, Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, and others, all speaking different languages and following different customs. Yet, under Hannibal's leadership, they fought together as one, bound by loyalty, respect, and an unwavering belief in his vision. The secret to Hannibal's success lay in his deep understanding of his men. He wasn't just a distant figure commanding from behind the lines. He was on the front lines, leading by example. His personal courage was legendary. He shared in the hardships of his soldiers, whether it was crossing the Alps or enduring the harshest conditions. His presence was a beacon of strength, inspiring his troops to push through adversity, no matter the odds. Yet Hannibal's leadership was also flexible. He didn't rely solely on rigid tactics. He adapted his strategies to the situation at hand. Whether fighting in the rugged mountains of Italy or open plains, he found ways to exploit terrain and surprise the enemy. He empowered his sub-commanders, like Hannibal, to act decisively within their commands, giving them autonomy while ensuring his larger strategy was always intact. But Hannibal's brilliance was not only in his battlefield cunning. He balanced ruthless pragmatism with genuine care for his soldiers' welfare. He understood that morale was just as important as strategy. His soldiers knew that he would sacrifice his own comfort and safety for theirs, and this bond kept them loyal through the toughest times. He was not a leader who used fear or cruelty to maintain control. Instead, it was respect and shared purpose that held his army together. Hannibal's ability to make critical decisions under pressure was also pivotal. Whether he was outnumbered, surrounded, or low on supplies, his mind remained clear. In moments of crisis, such as the famous crossing of the Alps or the aftermath of a defeat, his decisions were calculated yet daring. He knew when to retreat, when to strike, and when to wait for the right moment to unleash his forces. Through it all, Hannibal proved that leadership in war is not just about commanding from above. It's about inspiring, adapting, and uniting men from all walks of life to fight for a single cause. His story is one of brilliance in the face of adversity, and his leadership continues to be studied and admired as a model of tactical genius and human connection. Chapter 16. Rome's political battlefield: Senate, tribunes, and power struggles. Behind every military campaign in Rome was a complex, often chaotic political landscape. The Senate, the tribunes, and the consuls, Rome's ruling political elite, were constantly at odds, and their infighting had a profound effect on the war effort. The appointment of generals and the formulation of war strategies were not just matters of military expertise. They were deeply influenced by personal rivalries, political ambition, and the ever-present struggle for power. Rome's system of dual consuls created an immediate source of tension. Two men, each wielding the power of command, but with their own political goals. In times of war, this often led to a disjointed approach. One consul might push for bold, aggressive action, while the other favored caution and strategic delay. The friction between these leaders sometimes meant conflicting orders and a lack of unified direction. This struggle for dominance over military policy divided Rome's leadership, making it vulnerable at critical moments. The Senate, too, played its part in the power struggle. While it held the ultimate authority over military decisions, its members were not immune to personal rivalries and political considerations. Public opinion, particularly that of Rome's citizens, had a profound influence on the decisions made within the Senate. When the people demanded retribution for disasters like Cannae, the Senate was pushed into hasty decisions. Yet, when faced with overwhelming losses, the Senate could also find itself divided, with some members advocating for more caution, fearing further destruction. The tension between factions within Rome was further exacerbated by the conflicting approaches to warfare. On one side, aggressive generals sought revenge and believed that an immediate offensive could bring an end to Hannibal's campaign. On the other, more cautious voices advocated for strategies like the Fabian approach, which sought to wear down the Carthaginian forces gradually rather than risk another direct confrontation. This division often left Rome with no coherent strategy and no clear path forward, as commanders were forced to shift tactics in response to political pressure. The political infighting also affected the morale of Rome's soldiers. Generals, more focused on political maneuvering than on clear command, struggled to inspire confidence in their men. Soldiers, unsure whether their leaders would support them or abandon them, found themselves in a state of uncertainty and fear. The lack of unity among Rome's political elite made it harder to maintain the discipline and cohesion necessary for military success. Rome's republican system, though a source of strength in its checks and balances, often proved a hindrance during times of war. The power struggles and lack of centralized leadership meant that decisions were delayed, divisions deepened, and opportunities were missed. Yet, despite this fractured system, Rome's ability to adapt, however slowly, ensured its eventual recovery. Rome's political chaos also gave birth to a unique form of resilience, one that would come to define its ability to endure and ultimately defeat the Carthaginian threat. The Republic's internal struggle became, paradoxically, a cornerstone of its strength in the long run. Chapter 17. The role of religion and omens, divine will and morale. Religion was not just a cultural backdrop in the ancient world. It was the bedrock upon which armies were built, strategies were made, and victories or defeats were interpreted. For both Rome and Carthage, the will of the gods was paramount, and every battle began with a prayer, a sacrifice, and the reading of omens. The very fate of armies was believed to rest in the hands of the divine. Before every major engagement, the Romans would perform sacrifices and rituals to seek favor from their gods. The augurs, priests trained in interpreting omens, would inspect the flight patterns of birds, the entrails of sacrificial animals, or the movements of thunder to divine whether the gods were on their side. If the omens were bad, Roman generals were sometimes forced to delay or even abandon a battle, which could send ripples of uncertainty through their troops. The belief that divine favor or wrath shaped military success created an atmosphere of constant tension, as soldiers wondered if the gods had turned their backs on them. On the other side, Hannibal was keenly aware of the power of religion, and he used it to inspire his troops and intimidate the enemy. He wasn't just a general, he was a symbol of divine favor to his soldiers. As they crossed the Alps, Hannibal often invoked the gods of his homeland and the divine protection of the ancient Carthaginian deities, reinforcing his troops' belief that they were destined for greatness. He took care to ensure that his men saw their victories as a direct result of divine will, turning them into believers in their mission. But Hannibal didn't just rely on religion for his own men's morale. He used religious symbolism to unsettle the Romans. His army, an eclectic mix of cultures, presented itself as a force aligned with the gods of war, a divine army moving with purpose, making their path of destruction seem inevitable. This psychological warfare, through religious imagery and ritual, kept Roman soldiers uncertain about whether their own gods had abandoned them, undermining their confidence on the battlefield. For the Romans, faith in divine favor was intertwined with their identity and their resolve. After the catastrophe at Cannae, where they suffered the worst defeat in their history, the Senate ordered lavish rituals and sacrifices to appease the gods. The belief was that their defeat had been a divine punishment for Roman arrogance, or a lapse in piety. These rituals were not only acts of atonement, they were meant to reaffirm faith, to cleanse the soul of Rome, and to regain the favor of their gods. The Roman people, recovering from such a massive defeat, needed their faith to be rebuilt just as much as their armies did. This intertwining of faith and fate fueled every Roman decision from the ashes of Cannae. Soldiers marched not only to defeat an enemy, but to restore their god's favor. The rituals performed after devastating losses were meant to reaffirm Rome's purpose and its place in the divine order. They believed that every battle, every decision was shaped by the gods. This belief infused the war effort with determination, turning despair into renewed resolve. The soldiers of both sides believed deeply that the war was as much spiritual as it was physical. The gods were watching, their favor or displeasure guiding each thrust of the sword, each clash of shields. This mingling of divine will and the harsh realities of war was what made the Second Punic War not just a fight for dominance, but a battle for the gods' approval, a fight in which the very fate of Rome and Carthage was at stake. Chapter 18. Lesser-known battles, skirmishes that shaped the war. The battle at Cannae may be the most famous clash of the Second Punic War, but it was not the only significant moment in this long and brutal conflict. Throughout the war, a series of lesser-known battles, skirmishes, and encounters played pivotal roles in shaping the course of history, draining both sides' resources, testing leadership, and influencing the flow of alliances. The Battle of Trebia, fought in December 218 BCE, was one of the earliest engagements that set the tone for Hannibal's campaign. With a combination of clever tactics, he outflanked and overwhelmed the Roman army. Despite being outnumbered, the Romans, lulled into a false sense of security, were unprepared for the sudden attack, leading to a bloody rout. The battle drained Roman resources and morale, while Hannibal's victory allowed him to move deeper into Italy, establishing his dominance in the region. But it wasn't just a victory for Carthage. It was a lesson in the effectiveness of surprise and adaptability that would resonate throughout the war. A few months later, the Battle of Lake Trasimene would become one of the most remarkable ambushes in military history. Hannibal, having lured the Romans into a false pursuit, strategically used the terrain to trap them in a narrow valley near the lake. The Romans, unaware of the looming danger, were caught between the hills and Hannibal's waiting forces. The result was catastrophic. 15,000 Roman soldiers were killed, and the rest were either captured or scattered. This battle further demonstrated Hannibal's unrivaled ability to read the battlefield and manipulate his enemies into disastrous positions. But even in this victory, the battle exposed the vulnerabilities of Rome's military hierarchy. The Romans, and the dangers of underestimating an opponent's strategic flexibility. Meanwhile, in Spain, the Carthaginian forces engaged the Romans in a series of smaller but crucial confrontations. Battles in Iberia were not just about defending territory, but shaping the future of the war. In these lesser-known skirmishes, leaders on both sides learned hard lessons about the value of controlling supply routes, securing alliances, and maintaining discipline. Each battle drained valuable resources, soldiers, provisions, and morale, making the struggle over Spain one of attrition, where both sides chipped away at each other's strength over time. Hannibal's success in Spain ensured the continuation of his campaign in Italy, while Rome's eventual push into Iberia marked a pivotal shift in the balance of power. These battles, though overshadowed by the grandeur of Cannae, played a crucial role in shaping the war's momentum. They were small-scale struggles, but their impact was far-reaching. Each engagement tested the mettle of both armies, pushed commanders to refine their strategies, and ultimately shaped the decisions made at the higher levels of command. Tactical innovations were born in these skirmishes, from the use of terrain to clever cavalry maneuvers, all of which would be employed in future battles. The true cost of these smaller-scale fights was not always measured in casualties alone. It was felt in the exhaustion, the loss of critical resources, and the strain on soldiers. It was in these lesser-known engagements that the fate of the war was often decided, with each skirmish accumulating into a war-weary landscape. Amid the chaos of these engagements, individual stories of heroism and tragedy unfolded. Soldiers on both sides displayed extraordinary bravery, often under impossible circumstances. Yet, these stories remain largely forgotten, drowned out by the great narratives of larger battles like Cannae. But they are no less important. These men, who fought in the shadows of history, displayed the true grit and resolve that kept the war raging for years. From desperate last stands to acts of self-sacrifice, these moments humanized the brutal struggle that defined the Second Punic War. In the end, it was not just the epic confrontations that shaped the course of the war. It was the cumulative effect of these lesser-known battles, the small victories, the painful defeats, and the leadership tested in every corner of the battlefield, that slowly determined the eventual outcome. Chapter 19. The Final Push, Rome's counteroffensive in Africa. In the shadow of Hannibal's stunning victories across Italy, the Romans understood one undeniable truth. To win the war, they needed to confront the Carthaginian heart. After years of relentless pressure on their home turf, Rome finally made the bold decision to strike where it would hurt the most: Carthage itself. The move to invade North Africa was not just a military operation. It was a statement of Roman resolve, a daring shift in strategy that would redefine the course of the war. The man chosen to lead this counteroffensive was Scipio Africanus, a commander whose reputation was still in the making. As a general, Scipio had learned from the missteps of his predecessors and adapted to the brutal lessons of Cannae and the subsequent campaigns. But the invasion of North Africa posed its own challenges. For Scipio and his legions, this was uncharted territory, far from the familiar landscapes of Italy and Iberia. Landing on the African coast in 204 BCE, Scipio faced a daunting task. The Carthaginian forces were formidable, led by generals who had been trained by Hannibal himself. Scipio's first hurdle was to secure a foothold, to win over the local Numidian tribes who had been under Carthaginian influence. By forging alliances with these tribes, he weakened Carthage's power base and gradually turned the region's tribal dynamics in Rome's favor. However, the real test came when Scipio marched towards Carthage's core, with a force that included not only Roman legions, but also cavalry and light infantry drawn from allied tribes. Scipio's army moved strategically, using both military force and diplomacy. Yet, as the Romans neared the heart of Carthage, it was clear that this would not be an easy conquest. Scipio had to counter Hannibal's formidable experience and tactics while adapting to a new form of warfare, one that would challenge him on multiple fronts. The pivotal confrontation came at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. It was here that Scipio faced Hannibal directly, not on the fields of Italy, but in Africa, the very land that had been Hannibal's base of operations. The Roman army, though smaller, was well prepared, having learned from its mistakes in previous encounters. Scipio's tactical innovation, his ability to counter Hannibal's war elephants, and his control of cavalry turned the tide in favor of Rome. The battle was decisive. The Roman cavalry, commanded by Massinissa of Numidia, played a critical role in outflanking Carthage's forces, disrupting their formations. Scipio's strategy of allowing Hannibal's elephants to charge, but redirecting them through gaps in the Roman lines, was a masterstroke that neutralized one of Carthage's most powerful assets. In the end, Hannibal's army, exhausted from years of fighting and betrayed by its own lack of reinforcements, crumbled. The psychological impact of Zama was immense. For Hannibal, it was a crushing blow. He had brought Rome to its knees in Italy, only to be turned back on his own home soil. The defeat in North Africa meant the end of Carthage's hopes of winning the war. For the Romans, Zama was a moment of redemption, a signal that they had learned from their earlier mistakes and could adapt to new forms of warfare. Carthage, weakened and shaken, was left to reckon with the loss of its greatest general, the collapse of its empire, and the growing might of Rome, which now stood unchallenged in the Mediterranean. The invasion of Africa had turned the tide of the war, and the repercussions would echo for generations. Hannibal's strategy had been brilliant, but Rome's persistence and adaptation to his tactics led to a final, decisive victory, one that would reshape the future of the ancient world. Chapter 20. Legacy of Cannae. Lessons for future generations. The Battle of Cannae was not just a turning point in the Second Punic War. It became a lesson in military strategy that would echo through the ages. Hannibal's use of the double envelopment, the artful manipulation of terrain, and his ability to outthink a larger and better equipped army became cornerstones of military theory. Generations of commanders would study Cannae, using it as a blueprint for victory, and sometimes as a cautionary tale of how even the most brilliant strategies can lead to unexpected consequences. In ancient times, Cannae served as the gold standard for battlefield tactics. It was a shining example of how a smaller, more flexible force could overcome a larger, slower-moving one. Hannibal's execution of the double envelopment was not merely a tactical maneuver. It was a masterstroke in psychological warfare. By drawing the Romans into a position of overconfidence, he used their own strengths against them. This concept of psychological manipulation in warfare, drawing an enemy in only to destroy them at the moment of greatest overconfidence, would influence military minds for centuries. The battle also demonstrated the importance of leadership and intelligence. It wasn't just about soldiers fighting with weapons, but the ability to lead, inspire, and keep an army cohesive under the most difficult conditions. The battle highlighted the critical role of information, how knowing the enemy, their weaknesses, and understanding the battlefield is just as important as the men and materials one commands. These lessons would resonate through time, shaping the approach of future generals and military thinkers. From Alexander the Great to modern commanders like Dwight D. Eisenhower. But the legacy of Cannae didn't end in victory for Carthage. The Romans, though reeling from the catastrophe, did not crumble. Instead, the battle became a lesson in resilience and adaptation. Rome's eventual recovery from Cannae, its ability to learn from defeat and turn failure into victory, became a central narrative in the history of military strategy. The Romans adapted by learning from Hannibal's tactics and applying them in new ways. They no longer underestimated their enemies, nor did they allow overconfidence to cloud their judgment. Rome's comeback became the textbook example of how an empire, even on the brink of annihilation, can find its strength and rebuild. Hannibal's legend endured long after his defeat. His strategies were studied by military academies worldwide. from the officers of Napoleon's armies to modern-day military strategists. His name became synonymous with brilliance in tactical warfare, with his ability to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. The lessons he taught, whether intentional or not, formed the foundation for many of the principles we still use today in warfare and strategy. But Cannae, like every battle in history, left behind a human cost. Thousands of lives were lost, both Roman and Carthaginian, in an afternoon that shaped the future of the Mediterranean world. The timeless nature of strategic brilliance is often juxtaposed against the sobering realities of war, the loss, the trauma, the destruction. As much as Cannae is remembered for its tactical genius, it serves as a stark reminder that behind every great military maneuver, there is an undeniable human cost. Cannae is more than just a battle. It's a lesson in the fragility of empires, the strength of human will, and the lasting impact of military genius. It teaches us that while strategies may evolve and change, the fundamentals of warfare, leadership, and human endurance remain constant. It's a testament to the enduring nature of conflict and the lessons we continue to learn from it, generation after generation.